Imagine this. A 44-year-old man's wife and two daughters die in a plane crash. The father obviously in a complete state of shock. What was that like for his surviving daughter? Lynda Fishman joins me to tell us about it. She's written a book on the subject called Repairing Rainbows, a true story of family tragedy and choices. Good morning. Welcome to CJAD.
Thank you.
I know this is very difficult for you, but tell me about the day that it happened, the day your mother and your two sisters died.
I was in California. I had gone the week earlier for my cousin's bar mitzvah, and I had gone with my grandparents to set up the apartment we were meant to live in for the month. And so I got a phone call, or heard the phone ringing at 5 o'clock in the morning, California time, and my grandparents and relatives, everybody was hysterically screaming. And we were just rushed to the airport, rushed onto an airplane, and brought home to this horrendous nightmare of what had happened. And I was 13 years old at the time. For me, it was just a nightmare. Somebody was going to soon come into my room and tell me it was all just a big nightmare.
When did they tell you? Who told you?
My father called my aunt's house to say that he had received a phone call that the Air Canada flight that my mother and two sisters were on had crashed, and they didn't think anyone survived.
And he told you?
He called and told my aunt, and my aunt told me.
It was you heard it from your aunt?
Well, everybody was hysterical. My mother's parents, they were all, animal sounds were coming out of them. It was something I'll never forget.
When you came back, so then you flew back to Montreal. Mm-hmm. When you came back to Montreal, the cover of the book, the accident took place in July of 1970. The cover of the book shows it's a gray picture of a doll. Mm-hmm. Whose doll is it?
The following morning, the newspapers, the cover of many of the newspapers were a picture of this doll, which was my sister Wendy's doll, which was obviously horrific for any of us to see. And there was so little that remained at the site, and yet the doll was almost intact. It was actually unbelievable.
What was your father's reaction in the days afterwards?
My father went from being this jolly, happy man who whistled and hummed all the time to a very sad, withdrawn, horribly distressed man who never, ever was the same again. And he just continued to exist, but he didn't live again, ever.
Now, did you have a responsibility? Did you feel as a 13-year-old that you had a responsibility to be taking care of him? Did you suddenly become the adult?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was so distraught that he couldn't parent me. And so, yes, there was definitely a reversal, and I became, at 13 years old, the parent to this man. And, with tremendous support from our family and no professional support, I made a decision right at 13 that I was going to live my life unlike my father, who just seemed to be existing.
Did you try to fix him, to cheer him up, to pull him out of his withdrawal?
I did what I thought would help, which was to try to talk to him about the accident and about them, but he could not have a conversation with me about what happened or about them. It was just a subject that had to be left absolutely untouched.
When you brought it up, if you ever brought up the subject, what would he say?
He just couldn't talk about it, so he would either walk away from me or he would start to cry, which immediately stopped me from talking about it. So I learned quickly, this is not a subject we can have. That's it. No discussion.
Now, at 13, you're at an age of transformation for a girl. Did you feel you'd become an adult and you were the one who was in charge of running the family?
Well, when a tragedy hits a family, all the aunts and uncles form what I call in Repairing Rainbows the committee. Everybody got together and tried to figure out what was best for me and my father and make decisions on our behalf. And so I stayed somewhat involved in those decisions, and they wanted to hire housekeepers, and everybody was involved in telling us what to do and how to do it. But at the end of the day, really, it was me and my father. And yes, I was the one who felt completely responsible for looking after him.
The book is called Repairing Rainbows, a true story of family tragedy and choices, Lynda Fishman. What made you decide to write a book about it?
Well, I'm a social worker, and I'm also a summer camp director, and I've spent my whole life helping people. And I realize as I reached 40 years after the accident that I have a lot of life lessons that have helped other people, that I've been able to reach out and inspire and give people hope. And it was time to write a book about it. It was time to tell my story and to give people inspiration and messages about how you can get through a tragedy and live your life because the other choice is just to exist. And it's so sad to see people who are in tragic situations that don't live their lives. And at the end of the day, when it's all over, they really look back and they probably regret that they put themselves in a dark tunnel and stayed there.
So what was your father's life afterwards when you said that he was very withdrawn like that?
He just became a very different person. He wasn't jolly and happy anymore. He was very sad. He did remarry, and he did continue to live until 1999 when he was diagnosed with cancer and succumbed to it almost immediately. And I lost him again in 1999.
Did you have a good relationship with him during your teens and 20s?
No. Unfortunately, he was so different than he had been, and I wasn't so different, and we just took very different paths. And so, very sadly, our relationship was very strained, and unfortunately, he started a new life, and things between me and him were very strained all along.
Lynda Fishman, my guest. The book, Repairing Rainbows, a true story of family tragedy and choices. During the break, Lynda's telling me the most important word is choices, the different choices that you make. Do you think that your father ever had the ability to make any other choice? Was he just too weak to make another choice?
I think that no matter how weak or how traumatized anyone is, we do make choices. I was also traumatized. But I believe that no different than choosing what we wear every day, we choose how to look at things, how to react to situations, and how to think about situations. We do get to choose our thoughts. And I do believe that he chose to take one path and I chose to take another.
Do you think he had the ability to choose something else?
I think everyone has the ability. It's hard. It's very hard. I'm not going to say it's easy. It's really hard to choose life. But you know, I think that, yes, I do think he had the ability, and he made some choices that, you know, didn't give him life. You're
13 years old. All of a sudden, your sisters aren't there. Your mother isn't there. Right now, all these years later, 40 years later, do you still have a presence of your mother? Do you still have a presence of your dad?
Absolutely. They have stayed close to me my whole life. And at the beginning, when I used to feel their presence, I really thought I was crazy. But I liked it. It was very comforting to feel like they were around. I just didn't tell people about it.
Well, tell me about it. What was it like, your mother's presence? Tell me about that.
I would just get little signs and messages, things from birds. I would get messages from our family cat, who my sister was so close with. I would almost feel them around these, you know, animals, and that was certainly a big part of my life was our animals. But also I would just get this feeling like a song would come on the radio and I would feel like they were in the car with me. And as time went on, I started to find a lot of comfort in that.
Is that the same with your father, even though you're estranged from him?
With my father now? Oh,
yeah.
Since my father passed away, I have had such strong messages from him. And I've actually gone with my husband and my children to see a medium to validate some of these messages. And what she told us is in Repairing Rainbows. I put the transcripts in the book. It's unbelievable. Like, it's so unbelievable that I had to put the actual transcripts in because otherwise people would think I made it up.
Well, never mind what the medium said about it. What sense do you get from your dad?
Well, for example, I have 3 dogs, and my father always got a kick out of our animals, and I was in the park once with one of my dogs, and my dog did something really funny. One of my dogs is really funny, and I actually heard my father laughing, giggling again. I haven't heard that giggle in 40 years, and I turned around like there was no one else in the park, and it kind of freaked me out, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to tell anyone about this, but when I went to the medium, she said, and pay attention to your dogs. Your father is sending you messages through your dogs, and listen for the giggle again, and I was blown away. So those are the kinds of signs. So yes, my father and I have repaired all of our rainbows together, and there's no hard feelings at all.
You wrote in the diary that birthdays as we knew them are gone for good. Did you tell me about that?
Well, it's very difficult to have when someone dies, it's very difficult to spend the day of their birthday without them there. You know, all of the traditions that we did in our family always spent so much time celebrating birthdays and making such a big deal about everybody's birthday that on each of their birthdays, especially in the first few years, it was devastating for me. And I knew that I would never be able to have a normal day on those days again because they're not here. So
that still applies today?
absolutely. Their birthdays, I mean, obviously not in such a painful way because I choose to not let it be so painful. But when I was a child, absolutely. I celebrated Wendy's birthday. The accident happened on July 5th, and my sister Wendy was turning 9 on August 1st. So I had my own little birthday party for her in her room with her dolls and with our family cat, and just closed the door and had a little birthday party. Just me and my cat.
At the time, did you and your father manage to create new traditions?
No, definitely not. We spent a lot of time with extended family, and they were wonderful and supportive. But no, my father, he really was just existing. There was nothing. He was empty. He didn't even talk to me. He just became this shell that went through the motions of life, but really wasn't living. And I watched that, and I said, I can't do that. I watched that, and that's probably what really helped me choose to take a different path. So I just did not want to spend the rest of my life doing that. I felt like I needed to do something meaningful in my life.
When you were 13, did you talk about this to your friends, other friends who were 13, about what you're going through with your father?
No, I really didn't talk to anyone except myself. I was able to put my head somewhere else most of the time and think and dream about life being better again, dream about the way things were, and that I could get it all again. I could become happy again. And no, it was not a subject that I had with anyone. It wasn't something people talked about then.
An incredible book, a very inspirational book, Repairing Rainbows, a true story of family tragedy and choices. Lynda Fishman is the author of the book. She's my guest in studio right now. An amazing book, Repairing Rainbows, a true story of family tragedy and choices. Lynda Fishman, a couple of text messages. This is from Bill. I lost my 2-year-old suddenly 7 months ago. At the time, I had to make a choice as well to break down and disconnect or live. We were pregnant at the time with other girls. We chose not to climb up. We chose to talk to everyone who cared. We shared our little one's love with everyone, and we carry on a little. And our 4-year-old, my wife and I chose life and decided to celebrate our angel's life and to immerse ourselves in everybody's love and to love our sad, but a lot more loved. And I understand completely about the signs. Wow. And Bill says, we miss her so much, but I feel Alicia is always with us, and 10 times a day I catch some strange movements out of the corner of my eye. It's her. If someone is listening right now, they've gone through some kind of incredible personal tragedy, and they only see the darkness, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
To change those thoughts, to start to find some positivity, whatever, even if it's grasping at straws, find something positive.
Like, give me some examples, some concrete examples.
Well, when I used to search at 13 years old, I used to talk about how grateful I was that my father wasn't also on that plane, and how grateful I was that my grandparents were alive, and how grateful I was that I had friends and that I still could live in the house and look at the things that my mother had bought and feel her presence. And I would just search. Every day I would find things, and I would keep a scrapbook. I would look through magazines and newspapers and find positive little stories or pictures that made me feel good, and put them all in my scrapbook.
Now you wrote that you hated being home because you felt alone even if your father was there. Did you ever tell him that?
No, I really was so careful not to hurt my father or put any pressure on him to come out of his shell, because I didn't think that he could, and I wanted it to be something I was doing for myself. I needed him to do it on his own.
Was there at the time, was there any kind of help for your father's grief?
No, there was nothing. Nothing was done for any of us, unfortunately.
Do you think that has changed?
I think it's changed significantly. Now they would bring in crisis management. They would bring in people who would do crisis intervention. They would bring in therapists. I believe that things have changed, and there are organizations now that actually help grieving children.
And did it change the meaning of marriage and parenthood for you?
Well, I met my husband when we were each 17, and he also had a lot of tragedy in his life. And so together, our values and our ideas about parenting and family, and we just treasure and cherish life so much that absolutely, I think that, it has changed that for us.
Are there things that you would look at that you'd say that have affected you in a way that's changed you since you've written the book?
The book has opened so many doors for me. I'm hearing from people who I've never met who are telling me that the book inspires them and helps them deal with their own tragedies and their own horrific situations, and that they're making some choices now because of what they've read in Repairing Rainbows. So yes, it's making me feel really great that finally, 40 years later, something good is coming out of a tragedy.